Hello, everyone. Let me know if I'm audible. So, this this actually bears some context. So, I made a stream. Was that yesterday? I made a stream recently, going over and I think critiquing fairly harshly Jonathan Pageau's video on whether or not Christianity is revolutionary. I don't personally think he even really broached the question at all in an interesting way. I think there are ways in which to construe Christianity as quite revolutionary, ways in which to construe it as effectively, in a particular context, quite conservative. But I don't think that was really touched upon. He relied upon roughly 2.5 parables to indicate a generally conservative ethos. I would probably say, no, I wouldn't even say conservative ethos, anti-revolutionary ethos within Christianity, which in the context of that video was not, in my opinion, adequately described at all. However, he was kind enough to respond in the comments, and he suggested that I watch this for context. He's expressed that he's open to the idea of a conversation, which would be delightful, but that he doesn't want to waste his time with someone who will not be treating his position seriously. And so that's the goal here. We're going to be watching this as soberly as possible. I'm probably going to set a cap at about 2 hours, so I'll be commenting minimally except where it's absolutely necessary. And we'll see if we get anything out of this that sheds some light on, I'm not entirely certain what, but shed some light on something to do with the previous videos. So, without further ado, let's just get into it.
Christ is risen. So for those who were here last night, you heard Father Stephen speak, and it's been a few times that I've talked after Father Stephen. It's always a bit daunting to speak after Father Stephen, but it's also very strange because in the last conference I gave where we were speaking together, I felt like he was also in the same mind space as I was, that he was looking at the same sources, at the same fathers, and bringing his ideas together in a way that I found exciting and felt, went well with what I'm doing. And so as Father Stephen talked to us about this ontological transformation, the salvation as an ontological change, which comes through the incarnation, but also that shows us the source of reality. Down? Is that better? Yeah, a little better? All right. Okay. And so that is what interests me mostly, is because I am an artist and I'm someone who looks at imagery, who looks at narrative, who looks at patterns, what I try to do is to try to show people that the stories that we have in the Bible, that are liturgy, that are rituals, that they're not arbitrary, that they're not just these arbitrary things that we engage in that will somehow bring us to heaven or whatever how you conceive it, but rather that the stories that we find in the Bible and the traditions that are brought to us through the church, they're actually helping us participate in reality itself, that they're showing us how reality works and how we can participate most fully in reality. And so the mission that I've kind of given myself in life is to help people, to the extent that it's possible, see what this looks like. See that it is not just arbitrary, that there are these powerful, beautiful patterns which underlie our tradition, and those patterns are talking about something. They're talking about our experience in our relationship to the infinite God, and how all of that comes together in the wonderful, amazing moment of the incarnation.
Okay, so that's critical. So he's effectively going to argue that there is some kind of one-to-one relationship between narratives that you find in Scripture. Now, I notice he doesn't specify which Scripture, but we'll run with that for now. Within the canon of Scripture and the rules underpinning reality. And this part here where he talks about rather, how they express the experience of a relationship with the divine or something along those lines. That's crucial because that is what is going to, that is one thing that may be postulated to be in support of the statement that these stories, which are written by people, nonetheless indicate something about reality. In a stronger sense than just depicting events that take place, of course, within reality, or that use language that has real things as reference, stuff like that. So he's going to have to defend that. Yeah, all right. We've got 1 hour to do this. Let's see what he can do.
And how the incarnation is the source of everything. So what I want to look at today is hesychasm. Who here knows what hesychasm is? All right, so it's definitely not the majority. So hesychasm is a technical word to talk about the mystical tradition of the Eastern Church, the mystical practice and the ascetical tradition, but it's a way of also viewing the human person. The hesychast, the Christian mystics, describe the human person in a certain manner. And my contention, as I see the way that the hesychast describe the human person, I can see that description is the same thing or the same pattern as the architecture of the church, as the iconography that we look at. It's the same pattern as the stories that we find in the Bible, that all of these things come together and are just one more manifestation of how reality lays itself out. So it's going to sound abstract at the beginning, but you'll see it slowly land into very practical reality, I hope, as I go through this.
So this is sort of evocative of Plato's Republic, where he's, in order to find justice in the human soul, he's expanding the human soul out to talk about a city which is divided in the same tripartite way as he conceives of the human mind. So that in itself isn't inherently ridiculous. Again, I'm not optimistic that he's going to be able to carry this out in an hour, because this is a tall order.
And so you could synthesize pretty much all of the Christian mystical tradition in this one phrase that Christ uttered. Oh, it's not there. Let me just put it up. Yeah, that's right. You told me to do that, and then I didn't. All right. And so to speak of the heart, that's especially what I'm going to try to speak about. What are we talking about when we talk about the heart? We use it in colloquial language. We talk about the heart, even the most bland kind of non-denominational Christian will say you need to accept Jesus in your heart. It's like, who knows what that means? But they have an intuition of the truth in that sentence. There's an intuition about this notion of realizing something about your heart that is still, even though it's kind of deformed and strange, it still connects to something intuitively right. And so the way that we need to come to understand reality, let's say, is to understand it as macrocosm and microcosm. And this is how many of the church fathers talk about reality, St. Maximus the Confessor. And a good way to understand it, the notion of the center is a good way to see that. The tree is a good example of how this works. It's this idea, you can understand it as a fractal reality. That if you look at how a tree is made, every branch of the tree is the same structure as the tree itself. So every time there's the basic tree, but every branch is a little tree, and then every branch of that little tree is also a little tree. And as many branches as there will be on the tree, every single branch of that tree will be a little tree. So every single branch is slightly different, but they all follow the same pattern that the tree itself has. Okay? And so that is how this notion of macrocosm and microcosm is going to work. And as we look at it, you'll see how the church fathers interpret it. And so the church fathers, especially St. Maximus the Confessor, really emphasizes this idea. The idea that the human being is a microcosm of the entirety of the cosmos. And it's very important to differentiate the terms that we're using. One of the problems we have today in the modern world is because we've given our mind so much to technical understanding and to scientific interpretation. When I use words like cosmos, when I use words like heart, you think of just like a valve in your body when you think of heart, and when you think of cosmos, you think of all these planets and stars. In order to enter into the mind of the fathers, in order to enter into the mind of the Bible and our narratives, we have to come back to our experience and understand that human experience is the first experience. It's the first point of departure for any knowledge, any understanding. We are a being in a body, a conscious being that is looking out, and the world is presenting itself to us in this field of perceptions that we have. And so we need to try to enter back. It's not that hard to do that. It's not that hard to do that because we live in that space. We live in that experience. But we've been so used to thinking that somehow technical descriptions of reality, which are accurate, they're not inaccurate, but they are secondary to our experience, okay? So when I'm going to talk about the heart, I'm going to talk about the heart in terms of something that you experience as you're living in the world. And the beating pump is part of it, but that's not the totality of it. And so St. Maximus talks about, he says, the entire cosmos consisting of the visible and invisible things is man. And man consisting of body and soul is cosmos. For the intelligible things participate to the substance of the soul, as the soul has the same reason as the intelligible ones. And the sensible things bear the image of the body, as the body is the image of the sensible things. The intelligible things are the soul of the sensible ones, and the sensible things are the body of the intelligible ones.
Okay, so the entire cosmos consisting of the visible and invisible things is man. So he's probably going to elaborate on this in a moment. There are two ways to think this that I can see right off the bat. One is that when he refers to visible and invisible things, again, like this is really, there's so many like steps of credulity you need to take for this sentence to make sense. And man consisting of body and soul is cosmos. Like, what does that mean, man consisting of body and soul? Like these are undefined terms in the context of this paragraph. The entire cosmos, I don't know what that refers to. What should I be extrapolating from this term cosmos? Should I be extrapolating the fact of some kind of hidden order underlying the identity of all things, perhaps? Should I be looking at the fact that there are like literally visible and invisible components of the universe, and that is a common trait to the human individual? Like, what does this actually tell us? And the sensible things bear the image of the body, as the body is the image of the sensible things. I don't know what this means. Does it refer to the fact that the body is comprised of matter, and visible things are also, for the most part, entirely comprised of matter? As far as intelligible things are concerned, what does this refer to? Does this refer to the objects of perception? Does this refer to things in the world about which we seem to be able to have knowledge? Like, this is so underdetermined. Now, again, I don't have access to the original text from which this is taken, so maybe this is elaborated in much more detail, but I don't see how this is setting up. I don't see how this is a solid ground for an anthropology. This would have to, like a statement like this, a man consisting of body and soul. This would be late in an anthropological discussion. These terms have to be described and established as appropriate, and they just haven't been yet. Now, that's not a critique of Jonathan yet. We haven't actually gotten to his argument, but I'm not seeing a firm foundation going right into this.
It's a complicated quote, but if you look at it simply, it doesn't say that much, which is complicated. What it's saying is that you are made in the same way as the entire cosmos. That the way that you're constituted, in terms of the fact that you have an invisible aspect to you, you have something which cannot be quantified, cannot be measured. You know, what we call the soul, what we call the spiritual aspect, the intelligible aspect of our existence, that is also that which is how the cosmos is made. And now this is something which...
Okay, so this is a bit crucial. So, think about what he's inferring here. He has to be able to have access to a conception of the cosmos as a whole in order to be able to make this relation. Otherwise, what is he comparing? Now, to say that there are invisible and visible components to the cosmos as a whole, on the one hand, that's trivially true, of course. The vast majority of the cosmos is invisible to us. However, presumably, we're not talking about invisible in the sense of, from our perspective here, whether or not we can perceive it. We're imputing to a substance the quality of being invisible in all cases. So, how does he know? You see the problem? There's an anthropomorphization going on here, wherein there is this ubiquitous stance throughout the universe, according to which qualities of the universe are visible or invisible. So it's not related actually to the position of any actual human being, and yet they are judged according to their perceptibility by an anthropomorphized subject. Rager, you definitely can't explain this. Yeah, I would agree. Invisible things, aka transcendental objects, I suppose, although it sounds like pantheism. It's underdetermined. I don't know what he's referring to by invisible objects. And if he says something like the soul, well, now we run afoul of Kant, because Kant's argument is very simple and I think quite compelling, and I don't think it's actually been overcome. And in simplest terms, it goes like this. There are a set of terms in which we understand, in which we perceive things. We perceive things in space, and we perceive things in time, and we can't get out of that. You can't imagine things outside of space and time. You need to order your thoughts in time so you can have one after the other, and you need to be able to separate things one from the other, and you do so spatially. We actually cannot think without these two dimensions of our perception. We are actually severely limited in that way. You can think of it sort of like the flatland scenario, or to modify it a little bit. If you exist only on two dimensions, X and Y, if you happen to be existing on a painting, and assuming that, well, I don't even have to assume this, if you happen to exist on the surface of a painting, you will never actually be able to see the picture itself that is being depicted, because that picture is being viewed from a z-axis, from above. And actually, it carries a little bit further than this, because in actual fact, vision requires three dimensions. You can't see if all you have are points. Points have no dimensionality to them. So when we remove dimensions from our experience, we become effectively blind in a way that's almost incomprehensible to us. We can't imagine the level of blindness that we're talking about. Similarly, if you're going to try and invoke things like the soul, or like qualities of God, or like transcendental elements of the universe, you really can't in this way. Now, you can do something like Hegel does, and I'm going to botch this because I'm new to Hegel, but I've been trying really hard. What Hegel seems to do is he goes, okay, look, well, nonetheless, we know that there's an other than ourselves, and we can be conscious of the fact that there is an other than ourselves. So maybe our senses can't reach things in themselves, but nonetheless, we do have some point of contact. Our consciousness of that fact does operate as sort of a middle term between things in themselves and our consciousness. We can't get at them in the sense that Kant is saying we can't get at them. He doesn't overcome this, but nonetheless, like this, the stress shouldn't be purely on the limitations of our senses, because we can cognize things. The invisible is the unseen realm where God is, per Islamic theology. Well, that's the problem. Like, unseen realm. Like, think about how terrestrialized this is. We're talking about a space separated from our space that has the quality of being visible to specifically our kinds of senses. Like, when we remove dimensions from our experience and our imagination, we end up just being blind. But there's no guarantee, actually, that in absolute terms, there aren't ways of existing that are comparatively richer, provided they're also furnished with the ones that we have. So, like, when we think, for example, of being outside of time, intuitively we think stillness. We think of an absence of motion, but there's no necessary reason to think that, in fact, outside of time refers to simply a poverty of time. There could be other ways of being. I have no idea. The point is, we can't know. This is entirely inscrutable to us. And indeed, it's so inscrutable to us that the only way we can even conceive it is by referring to its scrutability or not. Right? Yeah, but don't we know that there are 10 dimensions in physics that we actually can't perceive? I don't know that. I'm not a physicist. I know jack about all this. Let's keep going.
I know, like I said, for the technically minded, it is so difficult to understand that, because we're so used to thinking only in terms of quantifiable phenomena and measurable things, you know, all this science and all that. And like I said, there's nothing wrong or inaccurate about that. But as we move further in time, and even as scientists start to come to the limit of their capacity to analyze the world, they're hitting a wall. They're hitting a wall, which is the wall of the intelligibles, the qualities of things. Why do we see unity in anything? Why do we think that something has an identity? You can't measure the identity of something, of anything in the world. It could be a cup, it could be a person, you know, the cupness of the cup, you can't measure it.
Maybe I'm just being stupid, but what about a measure? Like, you could measure, for example, a cup of flour. In fact, it's measured for you. It's a cup of flour, right? I'm not entirely certain how to respond to this, because this is out of my wheelhouse, but I don't know. There's something kind of loose going on here. I'm a little bit concerned that we're going to go from there is a limit to our capacity to empirically understand the world, therefore we need to adopt a mystic methodology. Because it may be that the appropriate thing to do is just to suspend judgment at a certain level, because we are indeed at our limits. Pretending we can surpass our limits doesn't seem to me to be an advantage. Again, I'm not saying that's what he's going to do, but it's, you know, there are red flags. Not a physicist either, but my understanding is that string theory / 11-dimensional universe is not commonly accepted. It just hasn't been possible to disprove. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I know he's alluding to Plato with the cupness thing. There are reasons why Platonism doesn't work, but we'll let him continue.
Because the cup is made of a lot of different details. It has parts. So why do we think that those parts come together and become one thing? What makes that happen? What makes things that are multiple come into one? The scientists are looking around and they're realizing, okay, this world is just a quantum field, they call it. It's just a field of potential whatever. And so how does it jump from that up to John or Joe or a tree? Or they can't account for those jumps in qualitative reality. They just can't, because they're invisible.
Again, he's anthropomorphizing this quite a bit. We actually kind of can. There are different theories about how this takes place, but like it's not required that we have a metaphysical identity of a thing for us to be able to cognize things conceptually, right? At least it doesn't seem to me that like that's inevitable. Jalma would have been great here. Yeah, Jalma absolutely would have been great here, but Jalma is very busy because Jalma has an actual academic job. So Jalma won't be joining us, unfortunately, for this one, but stay tuned because he will be in the future. But yeah, like for example, cup. I mean, I perceive this as a cup, first of all, because I've assigned cup to this particular shape, and because at a certain level I cease to become capable of sensing the actual particularity of its parts. Yeah, it's comprised of innumerable, infinitesimal pieces at various levels of scale. It isn't just one thing, it's many different things all at the same time. But that in itself doesn't prevent me from identifying a particular configuration as a cup. I don't think that's particularly satisfying a response in this case, but this isn't my area. That's just an immediate response that I have to this.
And so, if you look at even recent physicists, some of them are toying with what they call the anthropic nature of the cosmos, which is that they understand that the cosmos has to somehow be shaped in a way for consciousness to exist in it. And some go even further and say that consciousness is an inevitable aspect of the cosmos. It has to be. Without consciousness, there are no qualities. The world is just flux, right? Without name. You could say it. You could use the Bible way to say it. You could say, without let there be, without a mind that says, let there be light, let there be this, that thing doesn't come out of the potential. It doesn't come together. Okay? That sounds a bit, we'll keep going. Hopefully it'll come together as I go further.
Yeah, I don't think scientists are saying that. In terms of the anthropic principle, isn't the anthropic principle, let me actually look this up quickly. I want to make sure that I've got a vague sense of what he's talking about here, because that's setting off my BS meter. I would like to see a citation about that particular construal of the argument, rather. The anthropic principle is the principle that there is a restrictive lower bound on how statistically probable our observations of the universe are, given that we could only exist in the particular type of universe capable of developing and sustaining sentient life. Right. So, no, this doesn't... This strikes me again as a specifically... It's specifically concerned with why is it the universe is the way it is as we perceive it, not why is the universe the way it is metaphysically. It's sort of like, what are the conditions of a puddle of water existing on the ground? Well, among those conditions are that the surrounding ground is in a particular state, right? Because if there hasn't been erosion, there hasn't been like a hole for the water to pool, then obviously the pool wouldn't be there. Similarly, the universe has to be in a particular state to support life, for life to exist in it or to emerge from it, and to be perceiving it. So that's what that is about. It's not saying that without life, the universe has no being, or is simply flux. It's saying that the stable structures that we observe in the universe may themselves simply be contingent of features of a particular state of the universe that supports life, and isn't necessarily representative of absolute truth or something like that. Does my reading seem off? This is again not my area, so I want to make sure I'm not being totally off the rails here. I'm not seeing anybody saying I'm a blithering idiot, so I'll take that as permission to continue.
And so, what's important to understand is that St. Maximus and the Church Fathers and the whole of Christian tradition, they place the human being at the center of this whole thing. That's why man is a microcosm, because that's what we do. We are the ones who give meaning to the world. Man is the vehicle by which meaning enters into the world.
We give meaning to the world for us, right? If we're gone, that meaning doesn't persist without anybody else to perceive it. Like we assign signs to things, we label things. We use these different labels to create instructions for how to put these things together in specific conventional ways. But if we were gone, those wouldn't then continue to have that meaning. That meaning is relative to our subjectivity. So this actually just doesn't make sense. He's trying to ascribe some kind of... I mean, think of what he's doing. When we think of meaning, we mean literally, did this signify something else other than the brute fact of its existence? Okay, fine, fair enough, that's a fair question, but then the immediately following question is, to whom? Right? Like, what does... Like, if this book remains forever closed, the words aren't really words. And certainly not if there exists no beings in the world that can recognize it as in intelligible text, because if there aren't, then it ceases to be intelligible by definition. So, okay, so what do we have right now? Well, we're inferring a one-to-one relationship between the constitution of the human individual, undetermined as to what that is, and the cosmos, undetermined as to what that means. And apparently we have a utility in the sense that we give meaning to the world. This is not the meaning, by the way, that you derive from the sentence, man is the measure of all things. That refers to, again, the fact that human beings assign meaning to things. That doesn't mean that they assign meanings to things outside of the sphere of humanity. Like, they're meanings for us. When we make a stop sign, that doesn't therefore become a metaphysical stop sign that is a stop sign to, let's say, an alien god were to somehow enter into our cosmos. It's an arrangement of matter like anything else. Like letter symbols, only those who can read them can see the meaning, the rest just see random scripts. Yeah, exactly. But if there were no conscious beings, it would all be quantum flux with nothing to realize it. Okay, so here's how he's fudging this a little bit. It is still quantum flux. It's just that we are assigning names to crystals within that quantum flux, right? It hasn't ceased to be quantum flux. We don't magically change the world. We simply perceive the world, and given the fact that the waves, shall we say... Like, actually, that's a great example. So think of Interstellar, the planet with the giant waves, right? It seems like it's habitable ground. It has a stable form. There are landmarks. You can walk from point A to point B until the wave comes by, and then suddenly, whew, it's a big formless mass, but then it disappears and there's form again, right? Well, we're sort of like in one of those plateaus. Not plateaus. We're in one of those troughs. That's the anthropic principle. We are at a point in the universe in which consciousness and observation and what we call reason and things, these are possible. And within that stable trough, we can assign meanings to things, and those meanings may persist over time in terms of their applicability. But if we were gone, those meanings wouldn't persist after us, and there's no reason to think those meanings would persist once a wave came along. Exactly, it hasn't ceased to be fluctuating. So he's making a mistake here. He is equivocating between the stability that we observe in the world. Sorry, he is treating the stability that we observe in the world to a thing that we impart upon the world by observing it, and that's simply not how that works.
And without meaning, it's not clear what actually exists. And so St. Maximus talks about man as being the pinnacle of creation, that man was created on the sixth day, the last creation, because he was meant to bridge the invisible, bridge the essences, bridge...
Okay, actually, without meaning, it's not clear what exists. Not clear to whom. So the argument here is that without meaning, the universe is unintelligible. The anthropic principle is that the universe is only intelligible because it is in a state that supports the kind of life that... Sorry, it exists in a state in which life can emerge that can have a relationship with the world such that it can impute meaning to things stably for a time. Right? Like, it actually doesn't matter if outside of that time or outside of that universal state, the universe is unintelligible to us, first of all, because we won't be there, but secondly, because that has absolutely no bearing on the ontology. Like, maybe it simply is the case that the universe is in large part inscrutable. Like, maybe it is indeed the case that our capacity to reason about the world does have an expiration date.
The names bridge the invisible meaning with the material world. And so as we look at this notion of the heart, St. Isaac the Syrian says, apply yourself to entering your interior chamber, and you will see the celestial chamber. For it is one and the same door open on the contemplation of both. The ladder of this kingdom is hidden inside you, in your soul. Wash yourself of your sin, and you will discover the degrees by which to ascend.
With all due respect to St. Isaac, how does he know this? Has he seen the celestial chamber? Like, where's he getting this from? He's just saying this, isn't he? Now again, maybe there is an argument in the original text, I just don't have it with me. It might have been important to, include that here, but the ladder of this kingdom is hidden inside of you in your soul. Like, this assumes, this implies that he has been up there. But, like, to go back to the Plato metaphor, like, maybe, like, actually, there was a video game for the PS2, actually it was on all consoles, called Vex. And there were these mini-game levels where you became a shadow on the wall, and your controls suddenly altered, so you were now on a side-scrolling platformer, whereas before it was a 3D platformer. And you controlled your shadow jumping on platforms, shadow platforms on a wall to get to, heights up above. And it's sort of like in, like Nintendo did this a few times too with A Link Between Worlds, and I think a Mario game did this too. But the point is, like, let's think about the Plato cave metaphor, where you have people chained down from birth. Their whole experience is just shadows in a cave wall. They have no concept of three-dimensionality or of the world generally. And maybe there's even a limited way in which they can interact with the world, such that there is a one-to-one relationship between their willed actions and the stuff that happens on the wall. Somebody may think that they have actually somehow escaped a cave that was in fact a shadow on the wall, ascended up to the light, then come back down, and now they think that they're telling everybody else of a secret truth that's higher up. But in fact, they're still chained down just like everybody else. It's just they've had a simulated liberation, right? Yeah, Paper Mario, that's the one. Like, similar here, like, by what reason does Isaac say this? Is this just poetry? Like, Why does he assume that your quote-unquote interior chamber, whatever that is the same as the celestial chamber, whatever that is? Is this not a pantheist take of St. Isaac here? I don't think so necessarily, because he's not saying that the celestial chamber within is identical with God, right? Or at least not necessarily from the wording here. I'm gonna have to go refill my tea. There is a forest fire somewhere on the island, and the air is just killing me. I am drowning in my own fluids. It is not fun. But we'll keep going for a bit, and then I'll refill my tea.
And so this notion of the heart, this notion of the heart is starting to appear. The way that the Christian mystics will talk about the heart as being the... If you think about what I told you about this tree that has a branch which is the same shape as the tree, you can see it this way. The human being plays the same role in the world as the heart plays in the human being. It has the same structure, right? So the human person has a structure, the cosmos has a structure, and in the heart of the person there is that same structure. It's like an embedded, it's like an onion. It's like these embedded centers, one into the other.
There are so many problems with this. I mean, first of all, the major one is that I don't know what he means by heart still. Like, does your inner experience play a role with respect to you, with respect to your body, I suppose, as humanity does with respect to the world? That doesn't seem to follow. We're asleep a lot of the time. And secondly, we're individuals, and the world is comprised of many different human beings. And furthermore, I don't think that my inner experience, or my inner life, or my mind, what have you, is going trick-or-treating on Halloween. Like, you see the problem? There's no actual correspondence between these things. Like, it sounds nice. Like, maybe we're the soul of the world, but we're not the soul of the world. We are disparate individualities, individual subjectivities. And we're constantly coming into being and dying in different periods with completely different experiences. And as far as we know, there is no commensurability between any of our experiences. We actually have no way ultimately to get over solipsism. We just sort of, assume it. Like, it's just, again, it's so underdetermined. Now maybe he'll elaborate more in a bit, and maybe the link will be more limited. So I want to be fair to him here, but this is just, we're playing so fast and loose with our terms here just to get at a picture of the world that seems to be inspiring, but it's not telling us, it's not only not telling us anything concrete, it's not telling us how they got to their premises. So,
and we see it, it's not just in the Church Fathers. There's an amazing quote by St. Paul who says, "For it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ."
Okay. So, again, what does that mean? Who has shone in our hearts? What does that refer to? Does that refer to our imagination? Does that refer to our emotions? Does that refer to our sensual experience? Does it refer to our organ? I don't know. Now, it gives the light of the knowledge of the glory. Again, so many removes. There's nothing concrete here. Now, of course, this is a letter. You can interpret this in a more loose way. He's not really making a metaphysical statement. So this criticism doesn't apply to St. Paul specifically, but in terms of being used as a philosophical argument for an anthropology, I mean, well, right off the bat, this is an historical statement. It doesn't function anthropologically at all, because again, this is referring to a particular time in history and a particular event. Jesus Christ is an historical figure. Regardless of whether or not you accept his divinity, he is an historical figure. He existed in time. Descriptions of Jesus are not, at least, again, like if you assume Jesus is God, then you can impute characteristics of God to the world, because God and the world are both in a sense absolute. But you can't do that with Jesus Christ in all cases, because again, he had a particular locality, he had particular physical features. He said and did particular things, i.e., not universal things. Things being concrete are something conservatives look for. In reality, virtually everything isn't concrete. I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, it can be concrete in the context of sort of mutually confirming beliefs or something. So if you have like a coherentist perspective of knowledge. like Marxists, for example, who are not conservatives, are heavy into the concrete. Heavy. Great empiricists. Some of the best in the social sciences. When I'm critiquing Fukuyama soon, because I'm doing a video critiquing... I actually like that he did this. Kraut had a video on the emergence of the first European state in Greece or something like that, where he relies heavily on Fukuyama, and through Fukuyama, Fustel de Coulanges. Fustel de Coulanges is a very serious and very interesting thinker, but I would never stop there. I'm not going to go too far into this because we got a video going already. But Fukuyama, by contrast, is very sloppy. And what was I saying? Right. So I wouldn't necessarily call him a conservative per se, but he does sort of fall into like kind of a realist mindset. And he manages to make these heavily idealistic claims about the structure of society simply by referring to a middle term, like polity or something. So despite the fact that societies in different time periods have radically different structures and different historical reasons for how they are structured in the way that they are, he can say, well, actually, these all have similar qualities. I'm just going to group them all into the category of polity, quote-unquote, whatever that is. So it doesn't matter if I'm talking about a state, or I'm talking about an ancient Greek polis, or a Melanesian Polynesia, I don't know, like a tribe from Papua New Guinea, and however they conceive of themselves. Because they're all polities, they all have qualities in common. I can just assign these qualities to polity, and then there we go, done. Now we can establish rules for politics in all times and places. It doesn't work. Anyways, we'll keep going. But yeah, the point is that conservatives do not have a monopoly on the concrete. In fact, I would say they are immeasurably less concrete than leftists are as a general rule. Heavily idealistic in the vulgar sense.
And so this text is suggesting that there is a relationship between God saying, "Let there be light," and not only the incarnation, but the light which shines in our heart, the light which enters into our heart. And that light is this image of God that we're talking about. Like this conference is supposed to be about. What is this image of God?
Whose image? There are so many debates and schisms based around a conception of what God is and isn't. Like, this is just a non-starter. I'm sorry, Jonathan. It's a non-starter. This doesn't get us anywhere. If we get to a certain point and we just have no solid foundations and we're hitting the 2-hour mark, I am going to call it, just because, again, like, if we're not going anywhere, we're not going anywhere. But look, I'll be honest. Like, this is much better than stuff I've seen of, I don't know. It's better than Jordan Peterson. There is like an internal consistency in terms of the terminology. There is a system here, but it doesn't work. God isn't real, end of story. There's no way to tell that. In fact, it's not entirely clear what either of these terms mean, God and real, or even isn't, actually. Or whether what is referred to by God, whether that's real. We actually don't have an immediate way of determining that. Like, it could be the case that every Bible story is bullshit. The entire history of religion is a history of frauds and hucksters and whatnot, and yet still God could exist, and not just exist, but have identical qualities to the religion, to what was imputed to God by the religion of these hucksters and frauds. Like, that's not a contradiction. It does leave us with no reason to believe in that conception of God, but again, like maybe that's putting too much stress on the human experience. Maybe what we perceive doesn't actually, actually exhaust the range of things that are true about the world. The problem isn't that he's making that kind of assertion, that maybe there are things that are invisible. There absolutely are things that are invisible, or at least we have every reason to think there are things that are invisible. We know even in the visible spectrum there are things that we at any given time can't see. Like, look, what book am I holding behind the brown book? You don't know. It's not visible to you. It's Machiavelli, by the way. But he's not doing that. He's saying, no, there are invisible things in the world. Now I'm going to show you how they are visible. Because when he's talking about them and assigning properties to them, that is exactly what he is saying. He is saying that we can know about these things. We can sense their qualities. But he just finished saying that they were invisible. You got to pick one. The Bible is just a collection of written stories put together. Yeah, no kidding. Of course it is.
The St. Gregory of Nyssa, some of the fathers talk about this divine spark, that in the heart of hearts, hidden invisibly in the person is a spark of God. And as you remove the veils of the heart, and as you enter into that central space, then you encounter your own origin. You encounter your own origin. You encounter as much than your own nature as a human being, but you also come into contact with your very creator, who is hidden in the heart of hearts, you could say.
There's an Hegelian way to make sense of this, but that's not what he's doing, and it frustrates me.
So St. Maximus talks about the human being as this all-containing workshop, that binding all together in himself. So into God. So as much as, into man, yeah. As much as he has also been given the power of unification, thanks to his proper relationship to his own different parts. So as much as the human being unites his own parts into his heart, right? He doesn't use the word heart, but...
Hang on, H is capitalized here. Wouldn't that indicate that he's talking about God? He was brought into being as an all-containing workshop, binding all together in himself. As such, he has also been given the power of unification thanks to his proper relationship to his own different parts. Man was further brought into being as the last of God's creatures because... Okay, so no, he is capitalized with reference to man. That's weird. Usually they capitalize he with reference to God.
The fathers will slowly start to use the word heart more exactly. So man was further brought into being as the last of God's creatures because he was supposed to be a natural link between all creation, mediating between the extremes through the elements of his own nature. And so this is what I was telling you about, that the human person mediates the extremes of the world. The human person unites in them the invisible and the visible. And it's not complicated to understand because, like I told you, human beings are the ones that give meaning to the world. Animals don't give meaning to the world. We are the ones studying the animals.
Okay, he's so close to something really interesting. So again, one of the ways in which Hegel slightly overcomes Kant's idea that we can't get at things in themselves is saying that, hey, we actually nonetheless can conceive of things or can think things other than ourselves, and in so doing, we have actually conceived of them in that limited way. The border of the other and ourselves is a touchstone to those things, and we are sort of a mediation between these invisible things and the world of the rational world, the world that we can reason about. I'm butchering this because, again, I'm a fresh Hegelian. I have not been steeped in this for very long, only about a year. But that's not what he's doing. He's saying that, no, it's because we give meaning to the world, therefore. That doesn't count. That doesn't work. That in itself, like, again, the meaning we assign to things doesn't have a mystical quality that transcends human experience. It is entirely encompassed and scaffolded by human experience. Without human experience, the meaning we assign to things itself has no meaning. Now, that doesn't mean that, like, in a cosmic sense, that's a definitive statement against human beings having significance to some other being, but it's not going to be the meaning we assign. or at least not necessarily by dint of us assigning that meaning. And if indeed, here's the problem too, if indeed it does persist in meaning to something else, well then we are no longer the things that give meaning to the universe. He seems to be a bit inspired by phenomenology. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody sent me a reading list by him in order to understand his stuff. I might go over that at some point because I'm a little bit interested in sort of like canvassing that. There's a lot that's interesting here. He's just doing it really sloppily, and it's frustrating because he's putting his finger on some really interesting ideas.
Animals aren't the ones studying us. We are the ones who are studying nature. Nature isn't studying us. And so the human person has a central place to play in any meaningful arrangement of the cosmos. Even if it is a scientific description, behind that scientific description is this fact that human beings participate, and in participating in the meaning of the world, they are acting in the image of God. They are enacting their nature, which is to be that link between heaven and earth.
I got nothing. It just doesn't take us anywhere. There's just nothing like motivating this, you know? Okay, he's paused. I'm gonna grab some more tea, and I'll be right back. Just because I'm suffocating here. So I'll be back in like a couple of minutes, probably not that long. So just hang tight. I'll be right back. We'll continue this. All right, let's keep going.
And so when I think about this, it's funny because my mind actually goes to a very famous Confucian saying. And many of you probably have seen this saying before. If there's righteousness in the heart, there will be beauty in the character. If there's beauty in the character, there will be harmony in the home. If there's harmony in the home, there will be order in the nations. When there's order in the nations, there will be peace in the world.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and the communists, desecrated Confucius's tomb. Again, like, this doesn't work. Again, so what's the move being made here? If there is righteousness in the heart, there will be beauty in the character. The one-to-one relationship between the outside and the inside, between the interior of whatever we're referring to, and the outside of whatever is outside of that interior, the cosmos as a whole even. Maybe just your body, what have you. This is just stated. This is only claimed. And since it's only claimed, we can just discard it. We have no reason to think that this is true.
And so you can see in that image this embedded microcosms. You can see how it starts in the human heart. That if the human, that we have this saying, right, that the just.
Incidentally, as if to emphasize this, Christ said specifically, I come not to bring peace, but a sword. It's going to sunder families apart. Was Christ's mission to increase the aggregate of ugliness in the world, or is beauty entirely subjective? You know? This is straight out fallacious. Yeah, it is. I had people in the previous video accusing me of actually, Jonathan himself said that I had committed an ad hominem. So I'm going to explain to him quickly what an ad hominem is, and why, and what a fallacy is. A fallacy is an error in reasoning. So, if I say, Jonathan Pageau's beard looks silly, it looks fine, to be totally honest, but let's assume that I thought that. Jonathan Pageau's beard looks silly, therefore his argument is ridiculous. I would be committing an ad hominem fallacy. I would be deploying a description of his character, a negative description of his character, as a reason to think that his argument was untrue or unsound. But I am perfectly entitled to give a non-fallacious argument for why his argument doesn't work, and then afterwards suggest that maybe some of the reasons why he arrives at that argument have to do with certain attitudes or prejudices or what have you, without affecting the previous argument. Now that would be against the man, but it wouldn't be part of a logical argument wherein critiquing the man invalidates the argument. A fallacy is an error in reasoning. It is not simply a failure to adhere to certain manners.
Just upholds the world, that the saints are actually the pillars of the world. Without saints, the world would fall apart. That our saints who pray and who are in communion with God are actually holding the world together. They're actually acting as that link between heaven and earth. And if I say it like that, it sounds mystical and kind of esoteric and weird. But I mean, just think about it in your own very personal life. You know, what happens when your own life is somehow a little centered? What happens when, you know, you're able to move away from your sins? What happens when you're able to be in communion with the people around you because you're able to be in communion with God?
Well, hang on. Let's leave out that last part about being in communion with God. Maybe when you're able to have all of those other things, you can be a eudaimon in Aristotle's ideal polis. Right? Like, societies with no contact whatsoever with Judeo-Christian religion had stability, had virtues, had concepts of right and wrong, had things that even post-Christian societies valorize. Or even Christian societies valorize. Was it St. Augustine who was praying that God would spare Plato and Aristotle? I can't recall. Or like Dante puts them in the, you know, the first layer of hell, where it's basically just earth. Yeah. Yeah, this is just kind of silly. I'm sorry, Jonathan, it's just silly.
It's the effects are dramatic. Your family comes together, and then the community comes together around those people, and you always, if in any church that is fruitful and that is growing, has those people in the church. It doesn't even have to be the priest, but you have to have those people that are working on doing that, and then they end up being magnets and ordering the world by their own transformation.
Then why do they have such a strong tendency to become hermits? It's not a knockdown, I'm just saying. Like, if they're holding the world together at the level of society, why do they isolate themselves from society? And why does so much of society manage to function without any interaction whatsoever with these people? We are more stable now than we have been in a long time. Like, maybe not in terms of state borders, maybe not in terms of, like, you know, a whole host of different terrestrial concerns, but our lives are longer. Our language stabilizes. We have fewer languages, increasingly. we have, not that that's a good thing, but like in terms of like keeping things together, that implies some form of stasis, right? Like things are sort of starting to get fixed. We preserve texts a lot better. Like there's a whole host of there's a whole host of things that are not affected by saints. I don't know where he gets this from. Like none of this, like that whole communing with God thing. That's just stated. The volume is low for my voice. I'll come in closer. The nomos of the esoteric. Actually, like that was sort of the point I made about the spirit science video, and this is why I'm sort of liking this stuff to spirit science. Because it's claiming to talk about metaphysical things, but it construes them in entirely physical terms, in terms of space and time, in terms of categories that are historically contingent.
You know, and so it's not something which is kind of esoteric. It is actually how reality works.
Okay, but he wasn't talking about reality. He was talking about social reality. Like, that's a different sphere than when we're talking about, you know, the universe as a whole apart from humanity. Like, sure, there's, you know, ideological reinforcers and you know, centers of the community like priests. They have a stabilizing role. But that doesn't mean we simply wouldn't be able to become stable without them or without some alternative. Like, we know for a fact that we do, because there were vast empires long in advance of Christianity ever becoming a thing. The ancient Hebrews were nomads amidst, again, well-established empires spanning huge lengths of time.
And so we have this notion of this center. And one of the things that has actually, well, this is an intuition, this notion of the center, of the heart, of the seed, you know, of the pearl in the field, you know, the smallest seed, all these images that Christ uses. I had this intuition a long time ago about that, about this idea of this divine spark, which is hidden in the world, which is hidden in us, you know, which is hidden in creation. And the one thing that always bothered me, even when I was becoming to Orthodoxy, is that there's also this other tradition, which is that all evil also comes from the heart. And so this idea that that not only good comes from the heart, but also all the badness of our self. And I didn't understand it at first. There's the one famous verse that Christ talks about when he says, "But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. Those are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man." And so I really struggled with that at first, because I was like, how do you reconcile those two ideas? Because I could see it, right? I could see this kind of concentric space even in the church. That's how the church is built, right? You have the altar, and you have the chalice, and in the, you have the...
Okay, I'm losing my voice. I might have to call this a quit soon, but we're about halfway through. No, we're 20 minutes through. I think there's a question period too, so maybe we'll do an episode 2 of this at some point. But there's something potentially really sinister coming out of this, right? So earlier, and this is where you get into like this popular meme in apologetics of the noetic effects of sin, or the idea of belief in God as a properly basic belief that unsinful man simply has native to, you know, his natural capacities, in a gender neutral sense, of course. The direct implication, if indeed the inside of man corresponds to the cosmos, and the cosmos is good because it's a creation of God, the corollary of that is that if your internal chamber, as it was put in the previous quote by St. Isaac or whatever, the direct implication of that is that you are less and less of a man insofar as that is the case. And if indeed your goodness is predicated on you also believing in God, or having a particular relationship to a particular understanding of God, they're a little bit, fuzzy on what that means, then you get a really insidious sense of arrogance about you, because you now start to be able to treat other people who don't have your position as being, in some sense, inherently psychologically degenerate. Because now you're not just arguing with people with different opinions than you, who have been exposed to different arguments and are thinking through things in a slightly different way with different information. Now you are a doctor, and you are trying to administer healing to people who are being consumed by a kind of metaphysical cancer. And so you can't have good faith conversations with these people because they're in some sense botched. And you will not actually hear their arguments out honestly because they come from a befouled place. He's not going to go there explicitly, I don't think. I'd be very surprised if he does, but it's a tendency I notice. It comes out more in more overtly reactionary or political spheres, where people who listen to this stuff then go and talk about politics, and they discuss their political opponents as if they are in some sense corrupted almost at a biological, psychological level. It ceases now to be reasonable people who have been persuaded by different arguments, and it now becomes, well, you pathologize them. You don't just pathologize them, you dehumanize them, and you make them more and more, acceptable to disregard.
You have the church itself, and then in the church you have the altar, and then in the altar you have the actual altar, and then on the altar you have the cup, and then in the cup you have this invisible transformation, which is the thing which brings us into communion. So even the actual structure of the church is the same structure as this thing. So why then where's this idea of the evil coming out of the heart? And so there's some really, even here's this one, right? So Saint Diadochus of Photiki, he says, there in the heart is Satan. But the key there is in the second part of his quote, and that's where I started to understand it, is that there in the heart is Satan, though he is not at its core. And there's another amazing quote also by St. Gregory Palamas, and he says, thus when God's grace does not dwell in man, then the demons make a nest at the bottom of the man's heart, like real snakes, and they never permit the heart of man to desire the good. And so St. Diadochus uses the image. We're talking about spatial. I'm an artist. I talk in spatial terms, okay? So St. Diadochus imagines the center, and he says, I'm still saying that in the heart of hearts is that seed. But in the heart, it is these embedded microcosms. So the heart is the image of the man, is the image of the cosmos. So the same thing that happens in man is still already there in the heart. In the heart already is the same structure. It's just like embedded into itself. And so he says it's not at its core. So it's like the heart has a first veil, you could call it, right? And that veil could, inhabit. That's where those first evil thoughts kind of come out of, and then they come out. And it's even when I started to think of it in terms of the cosmic aspect is when I started to understand it. It's like, let's say that I wanted to change Diadochus's citation, and I can make it cosmic instead of saying the person. What if I said something there like, there in the garden is Satan, though he is not at its core. That doesn't surprise us, right? Because we know the story, right? We know the story. And then we can, if we look at the image, let me put up the image, right? If we look at the image, we can see exactly that, right?
They definitely succeeded at making the least pornographic depiction of nudity possible. Like, dear God, what am I looking at here? Are your nipples on your shoulders? What is wrong with you people? Anyways.
So there's the center, there's this axis in the middle, and there's that first little veil around the axis, right? So right there in the garden is the tree, and around the tree is the snake. And that's the same, that's the image that Diadochus of Photiki is suggesting is how our heart works.
But why? But why? Like, yeah, it's a nice picture. Okay. And assuming the picture, we can make certain inferences. But it is just a picture. Like, we could imagine a host of other pictures. It's not tied to anything concrete. I don't know what he's referring to. Like, if you take these terms for granted as if they simply have a meaning, then maybe you can just, those get fuzzy in the background, and you just go, oh, there's a connection. There's a connection. And then you just link things that you've sort of willy-nilly associated with these terms together. And it seems to create coherent meaning in your head if you don't scrutinize it enough. But if you go back and you try to understand, well, what do these terms mean? Like, where are these things coming from? It all falls apart. I'm going to get some more water. I think we'll go for like 5 more minutes. I'm going to call it because I'm dying.
And so you can imagine that in the heart, right, in the center of a person, and I hope by now that you don't think that I'm talking only about the little pump. If there's anybody who still thinks that, you're going to be very, very confused when I say that in the heart is as if there's a little heaven and a little earth in the heart already. You know, and that's what St. Gregory of Palamas seems to suggest when he says, if the grace of God is not there, is not active in the heart, then at the bottom of the heart, all the snakes, right? Think of the Leviathan now at the bottom of the cosmic ocean. You know, that you've got a little Leviathan inside your little ocean in your heart, right? So these structures, the imagery brings it all together so that we can see this pattern.
It's like analogies between pictures that are self-referential or referencing each other. Like, yeah, there's a great chain of being picture. Okay. That's not proved by another picture that is inspired by the great chain of being. This doesn't get us beyond the picture. It doesn't validate the picture. This is one of the reasons why Plato wanted artists out of the ideal city of philosophers. Because they work strictly in pictures, and pictures can be deceiving.
And so a good way to understand it, if we look again at the story of creation and the story of the fall, we can see what happens. We can see it in that story. Because we have to understand it as a separation. St. Maximus talks about how man's purpose is to unify heaven and earth.
Okay, so I want to go back again to that picture of the cosmic ocean as having a bottom with the Leviathan there. If indeed the universe is in flux, and if indeed the universe is comprised of, if indeed up and down is determined by gravity, then there is no universal up and down. There is no great chain of being at the level of the cosmos. And like, what does this mean? It's just opposing one picture to another picture. The difference is that one picture is actually motivated by studying the world, and one picture is motivated by studying other pictures. I'm trying to be generous to you, Jonathan. I'm trying really hard. But you're not giving me anything to work with here. Like, it's lazy. I'm sorry, it's just lazy. Like, you've been inspired by a picture. Cool. I like people who've been inspired by pictures. But you can't stop there and then start dictating to people how reality works. That's not responsible. That's not doing philosophy. It's not even mystic. You're literally describing the material world with fanciful additions and alterations. You're conceiving of the underlying reality of the cosmos in terms that don't even make sense outside of our planet. There's no top or bottom in space. There's no top or bottom in a metaphysical dimension that precludes space.
That man's purpose is to unify the intelligibles with the sensual world. That's our purpose. And so the problem happens when there's a split, when it breaks apart, right?
Because that unleashes chaos.
And we see that right there in the story of Genesis, because it starts with a desire to be God, right? So you've got this split. That wasn't what we were meant to be. We were supposed to be united with God, but we were supposed to do it in that incarnational, that capacity to unify the two together.
It's a bit strange to take this story that literally, because if we're supposed to be united with God, well, does God regularly let Satan into his house to tempt him with fruit? And does he give himself an epistemic vulnerability such that he can be persuaded to do so? To consume the fruit, I mean. Like, where is he getting this from? It doesn't say in here. Look, let's look for the story. Let's see if we can find any reference to we were supposed to be united with God in the Genesis account of the fall. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created them, male and female he created them, and God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. There's no reference to unity with God. God puts them into a place where he isn't, so he has to visit occasionally. Like, he walks in the garden apart from them as a separate individuality, as far as we can tell, in the context of the story. So, where is he getting this from? Is he just making this up? This doesn't come from the Genesis story. This Pageau just sort of starts flying without actually bothering to take off. Exactly. He's pretending to I don't want to say like he's pretending like he's lying, but he's fundamentally not laying a groundwork. But he's acting as if he has laid a groundwork and is now building upon it. But in fact, he simply laid out a picture that itself would only be justified at the end of a long argument that he hasn't given, and then building off of that picture. It's on stilts. The whole thing is on stilts. Like, there's that G.K. Chesterton novel called The Ball and the Cross, in which a professor or somebody, or a monk or somebody like that, some religious person, and Satan are in an airship flying around. And for whatever reason, they look at the world and they sort of metaphorize it as being like the earth is a ball and it has a cross on top of it. Satan's like, well, why shouldn't the ball, the world, be on top of the cross, like in sort of a hierarchical sense? It's a bit fuzzy, but you know what I mean. Excuse me. And he points out the obvious case, well, it would fall down. And it's like, okay, sounds profound in like sort of a guru type way, but it's a joke based on geometry that doesn't actually translate out to the real world. But the point is, that's effectively what he's doing. He is pretending that he is scaffolding this conception of the entire world, of human psychology, of fundamental reality, off of this adamantium hard, foundation of our divine connection, our connection to the divine, our internal identification with fundamental reality. But it's just a picture. It's just a picture. It's a giant ball standing on a super thin stilt
But Adam and Eve have this desire to be God. They try to go up. St. Maximus the Confessor talks about what he calls sins of the right hand and sins of the left hand. You could call sins of the right hand the sins of
I won't make that joke. I won't do it.
heaven, you could call them, something like that, in the sense that pride, self-sufficiency, it's this rising up, like putting yourself up above things. And so then they reach up to become God, and the opposite happens, right? They fall into shame. So they move from pride to shame in a second, right? In 1 second, they move from pulling themselves up and then falling down into this sense of shame. And then sense of shame is realizing that you're no longer in the heart. Because what do they want? They want a covering. They want to cover themselves, right? They want that veil. They want it.
It's a little bit rich to talk about the folly of other people wanting to be God or assuming, the power and the knowledge of something like God. Meanwhile, he has basically just said that he has access to, fundamental reality and indeed the reality of the cosmos as a whole. Like, that is the upshot here. And there are orders are removed so we can sort of play plausible deniability. No, I'm saying in a certain sense, right? But also no, because he's saying in a more fundamental sense than the actual empirical universe. Anyway. Well, we're at about the halfway mark, so I'm going to call it here because my my inner cloister, my inner chamber is rebelling against me. So thank you all for sitting through this with me. I'll do part 2 of this. Let's remember the time, 28 minutes in. We'll continue this possibly tomorrow, so assuming I'm not dead. So so again, thank you everyone for joining me. Jonathan, I look forward to your response. I'm really frustrated by this. I am very frustrated by this. There is so much just asserting things. And very little clarifying our terms, very little, giving a sense of our actual reasoning process. It's a whole lot of pictures built on pictures. And the first picture you're working with, it's not a strong one. It's not compelling. It's poetical. It has a central place in our cultural imagination, for a lot of us at least, not even for all of us, but for a lot of us. But it doesn't get us to a place where we can start making declarations about the structure of reality, or the constitution of the human soul, or even what that is, or if it is, and all these other little things. So, this isn't helping the first video that I critiqued. This is just more of the same. I'm not seeing a valid reasoning process here. The methodology here is all over the map, and it's not good. So, we'll do part 2. Maybe you save it in the second half, but typically with these things, you layer foundations and you build. We haven't done that. So we are at sea still. We are at the bottom of the cosmos in the deluge with the Leviathan swimming around. I am not seeing firm ground anywhere so far. But yeah. Thanks everybody for watching, and have a good night. Take care.